Hey pushers, here's your second round of Reconstruction lecture videos. I'm going to start you guys off by looking at the 14th Amendment, passed in 1868. And as you're reading the text, you're looking at this, thinking, okay, why am I looking at this? Please understand the 14th Amendment does a couple big things. One, it tells us who is going to be a citizen, and B, that the states are not allowed to take away the rights of a citizen as given by the federal government. This is important because it's passed in 1868. Okay, and it's this guarantee rights and security for freed people, the guarantee of citizenship. It helps ensure against neo-Confederate power because now African Americans are voting, so they're not going to vote in back in the Confederates, right? And making sure that the southern states are being punished for denying the right to vote to black citizens. This happens 1868. The question is why, ladies and gentlemen? Why does it happen? And here it goes. Right after the Civil War is going, we're looking at the voting rights of African Americans and states trying to figure out vote, not vote, all that kind of stuff. We see black codes that are used by the state and local governments to get around the civil rights laws that are passed by the federal government. So the big goal here is not to let African Americans vote because they're not going to vote in the former Confederates who had started the Civil War, done slavery, all those kind of things. So the three main types of black codes that existed were first off the poll taxes. So this idea that you had to pay a special tax at the poll to cast your vote. It was effective because a lot of the African Americans were former slaves, didn't have a lot of money, and couldn't exactly afford to pay a bunch of money to vote when they could barely afford to buy food. And so that's why, no pay, no voting, and no money caused that problem. You have the grandfather clause, kind of a unique way of doing this, saying that you can only vote if your grandfather voted. Well, if you're a slave, here's the problem. Your grandfather was a slave. Slaves didn't vote. And hence now the grandfather clause keeps that black vote away. And it'll keep it forever because then next grandfather down the line all have the right to vote. Literacy tests. These will be around for quite a while actually. We'll actually try to take one of these later on. I think you may have done it freshman year too if you did. But the idea that you have to pass a certain test to vote. So this test was supposed to be a literacy test, make sure you can read the ballot or be knowledgeable enough to read the ballot. And a lot of these former slaves didn't have the education able to do that. Top it off, all the tests are being graded by the white leaders, and so they can grade them as they want to grade them. And so all these were ways that kind of kept African Americans out of the voting realm. And it was kind of a big deal for the southern states, those in charge of southern states, because notice some the freedmen actually outweighed or outpopulated the white citizens, or were darn near close to being equal. And so by using some of these methods, you're keeping this many people out of voting in these different elections in these various states. And so this is really important as 1866 rolled around to the by-election or the midterm election for president. And so this is when they re-elect Congress, and essentially became a referendum on radical Reconstruction. Because if you voted in a radical Reconstruction leader, radical Reconstruction is happening. If you voted a Democrat or a more moderate Republican, it wasn't happening. So basically, it's going to become a referendum on that. And that if you elect in the supporters of radical Reconstruction is going to go down. Well, Johnson, who had his own plan and was fighting with Congress left and right here, had an idea, right? He was going to do this big propaganda tour around the country. He hopped on a train, and you kind of see painting one of the whistle stop train stops he made here, and went all around the North and was talking about how bad the radical Republican plan is, how good his plan is. Did a big swing around the circle, and it was not really well received. And the Republicans won this big majority in both houses, gained control of every single northern state, and it basically promised that radical Reconstruction was going to be the thing in the country to try and put the Union back together. All right, good thing for the North, maybe bad thing for the South, because here's what their plan entailed. We looked at this in class a little bit. Here's a little more detail. One, they're going to take away the civil authorities and make them into military supervision. So the military is going to be in charge of making Reconstruction happen. So if you fight against it, you have the military to deal with. The new state constitution has to have a couple of things, including black suffrage, ratification of the 13th and 14th Amendments to require and protect the rights of black citizens in the South. And Congress also had the military go through and enroll all eligible black voters. So they make sure that all the eligible black voters are enrolled in the state, and they have the right to vote and the ability to vote. The Military Reconstruction Act, you can see here, took the 10 states that were down there that were left and made them into basically 10 districts. These 10 districts run by the military, run by a general, and these were the states that refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. Notice some states up here did ratify. West Virginia, Tennessee, especially. Well, Tennessee did ratify the 14th Amendment, and ta-da, they got to become a state. So you could not be a state until you ratify that 14th Amendment and follow all the rules put forward here by the Radical Reconstruction Plan. And until you did that, you were still stuck as a military district. So you kind of see the dates on here as to when these states were brought back into the fold. Florida being, I believe, the last one, Florida and South Carolina. You have these people who are sort of scallywags too. Now, there's even some infighting among the white population of the South. So there were Southern whites who actually supported Republican Reconstruction. You have thinking about a scallywag. Why? Well, personal gain. They figured, hey, if I work with the Reconstruction program, I might get a sweet government job. I might get a sweet deal out of this whole thing, and I'm going to get a chance for personal gain out of it through the job. So by some, they're seen as these big-time traitors, and they were attacked by groups of the KKK, we'll talk about later on, and our vigilante groups, and kind of hunted down by them as people who were trying to support this Republican Reconstruction for their own personal gain. Another thing we have here is the Reconstruction Act. So as part of this, all the kind of orders had to go through the military. So it's kind of hamstringing President Johnson in a way, because now he can't give orders directly, even though he is technically commander-in-chief. And so he had to issue all the orders to the military, and all go down that way. And top it off, then the Tenure of Office Act, so the president can remove those officials without consent. And so this was a way to make sure that he had Lincoln government in place. And there's a big question of if it was actually constitutional, because as the president, he has a right to remove generals. He has a right to, as commander-in-chief, remove officials as well as his own cabinet. So there's some big questions about this. And it leads to his impeachment. So Edwin Stanton is the commander of the military. He's the Secretary of War, and was kind of the person that a lot of stuff was flowing through. Well, Johnson fires him in February of 1868. He then went and replaced all the generals in the field, in his right, he says, commander-in-chief, with those who were, more sympathetic to Radical Reconstruction, right? He replaced those people with the Republican generals with more Democrats or more moderate-leaning type people. And so by breaking this law, it said that he violated that term of high crimes, misdemeanors, and then the House impeached him, honestly, before they even wrote charges up. Now, for Johnson, being impeached in the House means, yes, you're impeached. Removed from office and conviction happens in the Senate, and you need a 2/3 vote. The Senate trial for Johnson lasted 11 weeks long, and people were actually lined up to watch it. You could watch it from the gallery, and it was the hottest ticket in the country. People were basically scalping these tickets out front so they can go watch each day of the trial. It was packed. It was insane. And after 11 weeks, Johnson's acquitted, found not guilty, which means that while he was impeached, yes, he was not removed from office because of one vote. Now, a majority voted to have him removed from office, but he needs 2/3 vote, and the last person decided to vote to leave him in office, hence he was never removed. Let's just say he would not be getting reelected, though, let's put it that way. Now, for African Americans in the South, there's a big adjustment going on here, okay, as we see this process move on. The biggest thing is sharecropping. So the former plantations that slaves used to work on were then broken up into little rental plots and rented out to the former slaves. That's what sharecropping was. You sharecrop, this big piece of land. And it was a way, in essence, of kind of keeping African Americans stuck in a degree, because you had tenant farming, you had sharecropping, and both ways kind of hurt the African American population. You can see where sharecropping really took a lot in terms of parts of Texas and Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, etc., all throughout different parts of the South here. So here's your tenant farmer. Here's your former slave, who might be. He plants the crops in the spring, harvests in the autumn. To get the material he needs, he goes to a merchant. That person gives him tools and seed, all that kind of stuff, and it charges lots of interest on him to plant the crop. He also has to get his clothing, his necessities, all those kind of deals. And then there's a mortgage, if you will, on your future crop as payment. So if he plants cotton, for example, he has to pay the merchant part of that crop to get payment for all of his debt that he's incurred. At the same time, he needs a place to live and a place to plant. And so that goes to the landowner. And so the landowner's going to rent that land to the tenant. Now, obviously, there's no cash involved here, no money, so you have to mortgage on that crop. And so the landowner is renting the tenant for a quarter, half of that future crop. So when he harvests in the autumn, right, and the crop is harvested in the fall, half that crop gets turned over to the landowner in exchange for the rent, and then another half of that crop gets taken to the merchant in payment for seed, those kind of deals. And at the end, you have very little money left over. not enough so that you can try and own your own land or anything else. In essence, this whole process will create what we call the cycle of poverty, right? Because the sharecroppers get the land and seed, he promises half the crop, he buys the food, all kind of things on credit, he plants the crop, harvests the crop, gives people the crop, and pays the debt back, and by the end, he's right back to the same process. He has no money to start this process on his own. And so, in the end, we're going to be stuck in this cycle of poverty forever and ever and ever and ever. There's no equity built up in the land, so the sharecropper can actually get his own piece of land and start from the very, very beginning. And so they're basically stuck in this cycle forever and ever and ever and ever. There was one promise made about 40 acres and a mule by General Sherman as African Americans who helped the army. That actually didn't happen, by the way. Very few people got this 40 acres and a mule. They need your own piece of land and your own mule to plow and take care of it. People try to break up pieces of land and give it to freedmen, but a lot of times the black codes didn't let that happen. And the land that a lot of African Americans got was really bad land. It was swampy, it was gross, it was darn near unfarmable. And this whole promise that they got didn't really work out. And so it's kind of used a lot by actors yet today, stating, we never got the mule, we never got the 40 acres, and that we were promised this land and never got it, and now people are stuck sharecropping. You can just see how much participation happening by African Americans. So some states had more African American voting population. Some had very, very little in terms of who voted in the different states here. You start seeing colleges established across the South for African Americans. So these would be black colleges that are going to be just for African Americans. And so some of these would be with help of the Freedmen's Bureau, some would be without help of anybody else. And they'll even become historically black colleges going forward. Schools like Grambling and those will be kind of considered to be quote-unquote black colleges, mainly made for African Americans and very related in some ways to the Freedmen's Bureau. You also had some African Americans become elected to office. So some ran for office on both the House and the Senate and would serve in office for many years from the southern states. Obviously elected in by the black populace, but representing the whites that lived in those areas as well. And something came to start questioning, quote unquote colored rule or African American rule in the South, to where you kind of see this arguing taking place and the exasperated white guy kind of stuck in the middle, arguing that, are African Americans able to rule in the South because they lack education, experience, all those kind of things. As I said, a lot of the voters in the South were, these former black veterans who had fought in the war, those kind of things, and they're really unprepared. They didn't have a lot of education, a lot of how things worked, just because they've been slaves, and so they didn't have those. They didn't kind of be educated on how politics work, how voting worked, who you should vote for, all those ideas. And since 1867, they could register and vote, but they had to do all those black codes that restricted many of them from voting for whatever reason it might be. And voting was a huge deal and a very public deal, and you can kind of see that everyone can see how you're voting back then. The private ballot didn't really exist yet, and they actually had to make another amendment just to guarantee federal voting rights. And that was the 15th Amendment in 1870, stating that the states may not take away right to vote on any race, color, or prejudice or servitude. So you cannot take away the right to vote based off that. Now, you take away the right to vote based on felonies, like it is today, but that's that. The group that really was unhappy about this was women's rights groups. They've been fighting for the right to vote since the 1830s, and now while African American men could vote, women were still not allowed to vote and would not be allowed to vote until 1920. And so a lot of women's rights movements saw this as kind of a setback, that they have been asking for the right to vote, and it's being given to African Americans, but not given to them. And if you're an African woman, it's kind of a double whammy that way. The last group we're talking about here is the KKK, as Invisible Empire. The idea that, what happens to the South. There were some violence against African Americans and those that helped African Americans in the South from the KKK. You saw lynchings, attacks, all that kind of stuff going on. The KKK, Ku Klux Klan, where actually there was a social club for Confederate veterans originally, and veterans from the Civil War who would meet together and hang out, all that kind of stuff. And they started attacking African Americans, intimidating people. Carpetbaggers came to help people in the South, and a lot of people hid their face with masks and all kind of stuff that you see here. They would threaten African Americans who were trying to vote. They would burn the crops and the schools down. They told you not to do business with African Americans or sell to them or farm with them. And it really impacted politics, because if African Americans are scared to vote, they're not going to be able to vote in people that are going to be able to help them out. And that was kind of the theory of how it was supposed to work. You saw the Enforcement Acts passed in 1871 as a way to kind of stop this. And the South kind of saw it as a lost cause. They couldn't fight against Republican Reconstruction, whereas you started seeing the rise of two other groups like the Bourbons and the Redeemers, who want to try and see the South return to the way it was before the war. We'll stop there, guys. Check out part 3, coming to you very, very soon.